One. Well, hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you this week. I got a great word that we are going to unpack with a fantastic guest today. And the word is like super easy at the outset, but it gets kind of deep and ambiguous as you start to unpack this. So the word here is scale. And the question is, what is it and why do I need to know about it? And I think we as entrepreneurs have all heard the word, probably a little misnomer, maybe some misinformation. So I found an expert on the West Coast that is going to help us unpack this today. So I'm honored to be hanging out with Jared Jennings. How are you today, my friend?
I'm great, Dave. Thanks. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You're the founder and CEO of Phantom Brands. So fill us in on what Phantom Brands is.
Yeah, so Phantom is a company that I started that builds and grows e-commerce brands for public figures like athletes in the NBA, athletes in the NFL, and we also work with established brands, so brands that are already existing. They already have a product, they already have an online store. We go in and we help them with marketing, branding, operational efficiency, all that sort of stuff.
And so that's again where scaling comes in for you. How did that connection for you start?
So I started Phantom because I got into online business and e-commerce with my own clothing brand. So that was my first ever business, my first ever brand. And I went from payroll sales. I wanted to start a business. I came into clothing. So I came into clothing and I started my first brand, Full Hearts. I grew that. I knew nothing going in. I learned everything from the ground up. I bought online courses. I watched YouTube videos. There was a lot I had to figure out. And it was a streetwear brand, so it was very important that we had athletes and musicians and influential people of that nature wearing our product. It's where our target audience is. That's how they're
Sure,
influenced. And
sure.
so I built relationships with a lot of this type of clientele. And when I thought of Phantom, I thought, well, they have an audience, they have resources, but they don't have the time. But this could be a great idea for them to own their own brand and wear it, when they get all this media exposure. And
Sure.
so I created an offer. I reached out to everybody that I knew and had relationships with, basketball, NFL, musicians, etc. Got my first client, and that's where it all began.
Wow, super. Well, and there's such a good, easy connection between payroll and clothing. So I don't know. That doesn't even, I'm like, holy cow, the guy goes from payroll to clothing. And
Yeah.
as we talked before we jumped on, Jared, there's a lot of people right now listening around the globe that really are envious of what you've done, what I've done in the sense of, being an entrepreneur. So can you share with the world what that looked like, because we have again a lot of people that are in corporate and they want to know how to do that jump into entrepreneur world. And I always say there's no right or wrong way, so this is just one person's way that they did it. But how did that work for you? You were in payroll, and what happened to be like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this anymore, or I want to own my own business? Kind of walk us through that journey if you could.
Yeah, so my entire life up until that point was geared towards selling and sales. And I positioned my majors in college and the work I did part-time during college to be in retail. Like my whole life was going sales, 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 because I simply didn't have any other concept of a way to make good money. And also, I could talk. So I was like, I'll just go into sales. I didn't know anything else. So I go into sales. Very quickly, I understood I was in a massive company. So not a startup. It was a very, very corporate role with teams and team meetings. And it just wasn't for me. There was a lot of politics. There was a lot of bureaucracy. The culture, the pay sucked too, obviously, but
Sure.
there was nothing really aligned with what I wanted to do. And I had this kind of a big existential crisis of saying I have to become an entrepreneur because I really enjoy freedom. I really enjoy living a fulfilled life. And I felt very unfulfilled and I had no freedom. And so
Sure.
I said, well, I have to make a change. I have to start a business. I have to do something on my own. And so something I would say to everybody listening is really identify what it is that you care about and what it is that you want, because the beginning of entrepreneurship is really, really hard. It sucks. It's grueling. It's very stressful. I was on the brink of quitting many times. And if I didn't feel like I had to do it, I wouldn't have.
Yeah.
I essentially in my own mind, I had no other option. And so that's
Yeah.
why I did it. And so I would ask people like, what do you really, if, are you sure you want this? Is what I would say. Because
Sure.
it looks really glamorous. right?
Right.
But we all know it can be very difficult. We all know there's very hard times. So I would just, if you're sure you want it, go all in.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and you bring up a great point, Jared. I mean, so many people think that it's like, oh, you can sit on the beach with your laptop and you can, call your own shots, pick your own hours, travel when you want. And, definitely that's what it leads to. But like you said at the beginning, it isn't anywhere close to that way. At least it wasn't for me. But you bring up a great word, fulfillment. And I think that that's really important for the listener and the viewer on that piece. So, kind of fill us in. You weren't fulfilled in corporate America. How did you know that, like, this entrepreneur journey would scratch that itch, so to speak? How did you know that that would work?
So I identified the need for fulfillment because I said, I'm going to work so many hours of my life. That's where it came from. I was like, I need to enjoy, at least to a good degree, what I'm doing because I'm going to be
Yeah.
working so much outside of sleep. It's probably the thing we're going to be doing the most, more than spending
Right.
our time with our family, traveling. So I really need to enjoy what I do. That became a big priority for me. And so I identified how I'm going to accomplish this. How am I going to love what I do, make good money, have fulfillment, make an impact? What does that look like for me specifically?
Yeah.
And so when I looked at every business model, when I looked at different jobs, it really just became clear that the highest payoff for work was entrepreneurship. Like I'm going to be working anyways. I might as well work on my own.
Yeah.
It makes the most billionaires, it makes the most multimillionaires, I think right behind real estate, give or take.
Sure.
Um, but then you have the fulfillment aspect of being able to create something of your own, and everything else kind of blurred out at that point. When I know I can do those two things, I'll do whatever it takes, essentially.
Sure.
And so I just didn't see another path. I
Yeah.
genuinely just said this is the only path that makes sense for me, and I'll do whatever it takes.
Wow. Was it, I gotta believe there was a bunch of fear involved early. Were you sure once you knew, Jared, that so you're in this payroll world and you were like, I don't like this for the myriad of reasons that you covered, and I know what I want to do as far as the kind of the path. But how did you end up in close, or how did you know, like, all right, I know that I don't want to do this? How did you end up picking your lane, so to speak, in the entrepreneur world?
So I did a lot of research about entrepreneurs that I admired. I did some research, I read some books. I said, I don't know where to start. I don't even know what to do. So I had listened to this podcast by Aubrey Marcus, who is the owner of On It, which is a supplement brand. And I enjoyed the holistic approach he's always taken in his podcast and how he sees the world. And so I was listening to a podcast and he mentioned that the best entrepreneurs combine two passions into their business. And so I was like, okay, that's interesting. That's something I can just write down my passions and I can maybe, crisscross and mash them two up and maybe have a business.
Sure.
And so I started to think about and brainstorm about the passions that I could combine. And I was like, well, I actually have always been into clothing. And even when I was a kid, I used to play baseball. I was like 6 years old designing Nike shoes online. So I've always kind of had that knack. Okay, that sounds pretty
Sure.
good. I always like dressing. And then I was like, well, I could also combine the spiritual aspect to it and make it kind of a cool brand like that. And I just ran with it. It felt right intuitively on a gut feeling. I was like,
Sure.
this feels right. But it took brainstorming, it took journaling, it took just soul searching almost. Just like,
Yeah.
what am I going to do? And I landed on clothing.
Wow. Well, and you said two passions, and that's kind of, I have to say, that's the first time that I've heard that because generally people are saying, hey, find something that you're passionate about and run with that. Was there something special, or was there like a secret sauce in adding that second one to that? Or was that, I mean, there must be method to that because I really love having two passions. I think that's really brilliant.
It gave me a bit more direction on the brand. And I
Okay.
say that specifically for my example because clothing can be very broad, right? Like clothing can be anything. Like what kind of brand am I going to start? But knowing that I was combining that aspect gave me more clarity on brand direction, the pieces, the designs, things of that nature. And I think it also just gives you a little bit more fuel in the fire. You're combining two passions. You have two things going that you
Sure.
both really care about, and you need all
Yeah.
the fuel you can get in the beginning because because you don't know where you're going. At least I didn't know where I was going, so I all I had was fuel. I was just going
Yeah.
somewhere.
Right? Every road took you wherever. So that's awesome. So was it easy to leave payroll for you at that point?
So I started working on the brand obviously way before I left,
Okay.
and learning the skill sets, creating things, ordering samples, creating the brand. And then basically for the first year, I juggled both. which was hard, of course. Um, and then I was able to make the leap, but it takes time to, I was so delusionally optimistic, which, kind of served me well because it kind of shadowed some risk and I took a lot of risk,
Yep.
which is good,
Yep.
but it took longer than I thought it would. And there was more to learn than I thought it would. So I would recommend jump all in, but balance it at least maybe for a first year, 6 months, until that income is really making sense to leap.
Yeah, and I think I don't know what your experience has been in that, Jared, but most of the people that I have this discussion with, they're like, figure like two or three times longer than you really think it's going to take to start making money. So for you, you jump out of one, you jump into another. Was it like an instant success or was it a journey for you? How did that go once you decided, number one, I don't want to work in corporate? And number two, I want to be in the clothing world. Were you off and running or were there still hiccups along the way?
So many hiccups, so many hiccups. We had certain wins here and there. We had certain brand wins. I mean, 3 weeks after I launched my first brand, I was hacked. My Facebook was hacked and I was wiped off the internet
Oh,
with
geez.
all my inventory sitting there and everybody saying like, where can I tag you? Where are you, etc. That's a fun thing to go through when you have no idea what's going on to begin with, right? So because I
Yeah.
hired somebody to go into my Facebook ads manager because I didn't know what I was doing,
Yeah.
obviously, and I wanted to market, I wanted to grow the brand. So I was like, I'll run some ads. They hacked me. That's what I get for hiring somebody when I don't know what I'm doing, because
Sure.
then you can't even monitor them. You can't even see if they're doing a good job, which is a very important lesson I learned. So there was a ton of hiccups. I mean, a ton of hiccups. Having to learn marketing from the ground up, right? Like, what is my selling skills going to do in a clothing brand? Like, I was transferring over nothing, so I essentially had to
Yeah.
learn everything from the ground up, and there was a ton of hiccups because of it.
So were you learning as you go? I mean, did you surround yourself with because this I get asked a lot. Should I just go through these hiccups? Should I go through these things myself and learn, or am I better off surrounding myself with smart people? I mean, Steve Jobs said we don't hire dumb people here and tell them what to, and tell them what to do. We hire smart people and they tell us what to do.
Mm.
I think I love that concept, but I'm just curious from your perspective, did you fight through a lot of it and learn and go through that mistakes, or did you surround yourself with people that had been through it before? Which one would you say you would landed closer to?
So I was 9 months in when invested in my first course and mentorship with
Okay.
somebody that had been in clothing. So for the first 9 months, I just went at it alone, and I think that's where most people start. And
Yeah.
I also believe that a lot of people come up with excuses of not to start because of said reason. Because I need to find my best partner for the company, and I need to be. You just start. Steve
Yeah.
Jobs didn't start with Harvard MBAs coming to him, telling him what to do. Steve Jobs started on the conveyor belt and worked his way up by himself. That's where most things
Yeah.
start, typically, unless you have a friend that you want to do that with. Most people just action is more important than anything. If
Yeah.
you are waiting for people, you should be taking action. And all the best minds and the best people, the best entrepreneurs will flock when you get to that level. It's very hard to attract very brilliant people unless you're paying to get into a room with them when you're starting
Yeah.
out. Because what
Sure.
value do you bring them? Right? Like that's
Yeah.
like nothing. What
Yeah.
value am I going to bring someone that's very successful and accomplished? Nothing. So I had to start on my own. And then I invested into mentorships and that really did help.
Oh, that's a great way to think of it, is number one, you probably do start for most people listening that have this idea. They're unsure of how to make that work. A lot of people do start on their own, but I think it's great because, like you just said, a lot of people are waiting for something. And, once I get this, once I get that, once I get noticed, once I get a spokesperson, once I get whatever, and I think that's where a ton of businesses never take off is because, like you said, they're waiting for something. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, my parents were like, don't just stand there, do something, And it's
Mhm.
like I like that thought process of don't just stand there, do something. So, was that kind of once you started this whole thing for yourself, Jared, did you think of scaling like right away, or was that kind of a concept that came to you later?
It's a concept that I obviously want to grow the business as much as I could and grow all my businesses whenever I launch them. But my knowledge of what that meant was so low, of
Yeah.
course, right? Your knowledge and how you're able to perceive things, the perspective just gets broader, right? And when I started, it was very, very small. I didn't even know what I was looking at. So my concept of scaling has just increased a lot. The concept, the information, the knowledge that I have around it has really, really grown as I've gotten just more reps in the ring.
And scale. So how would you define scaling? If somebody asked you how to define that word, what's the best terminology that you use for it?
I think on a broad sense, I would want to identify what they want, as in why they're in business and what they care about. Some people go into business just for freedom. And so we don't need more clients for freedom, right?
Yeah,
We probably need less clients at a higher revenue. Get your freedom. So it really just
sure.
depends on what it is that you want. On a very general basis, though, it's to me, it's more revenue. There's a lot of different ways to get there, right? If you're selling a product, if you're selling a service, if you have tech, there's so many different mechanisms to twist and turn and pull to get that scale. For me with
Yeah,
Phantom Brands, it's clientele. For me with my coaching, it's people I mentor. So it really just depends on what it is that you want and what is your business model. I
yeah.
would try to double down on everything that's working. That typically is a pretty foolproof way to scale pretty quickly, but it depends on what you want.
And I think that so we were talking about before we jumped on today about how I feel like there's either a blind spot with people or this really gross misunderstanding of scaling because I feel like, only these big brands can scale. I think that's a pretty prevalent thought process that, you know, like a guy like me, a Midwest-based, coaching firm that speaks around the country and things like that. It's like, what does that look like for scale? Or someone listening that might be a manufacturer and, or a chiropractor, they have these limited visions for themselves. And then they think scaling is, hey, if I can get a 10% growth year over year, I'm happy with that. And that's where I don't know about interchanging growth and scaling because like 1% growth is still growth, right? Is to me, and I want you to help me with this, scaling feels really massive. And so when you get someone that has that massive thought process, you can't really start at that, I don't think. But I want to get when you find somebody that wants to scale, like what's the next step once they've determined that that's what they want to do?
So it's funny you mentioned the small thinking.
Yeah,
Maybe we need to scale your mindset. Like
right.
maybe we should start with your mind, right? Maybe you have too much limitation around your expectation of how much you should be making, right? Maybe you have
Yeah,
a lot of limiting beliefs, but that could be an entire another podcast. But when it comes to scaling, the very first question is where do you want to go? Like the very, what do you want to scale to? And I always implore them to think big, right? So let's say 12 months you want to double revenue, which is great. 12 months you want to double revenue. What does that mean for them? And also, scaling has a lot to do with systems too, because depending on the business model, you typically can't stay the same size, same tech, same everything, and manage to double revenue, right? So it
yeah,
it also includes pieces of the puzzle that go beyond adding revenue. Like maybe you have to hire somebody. So that's part of scaling, right? Maybe you have to add technology, maybe you have to change your pricing, your offer, etc., to get the end result that you want. But I think
yeah.
it really just comes down to what does that mean to the person? How much, what percentage, and how quick a time? From there, we can get more aggressive, less aggressive, etc. in terms of more rev.
Yeah. So the average person probably listening right now, Jared's just they're thinking, I love your scale your thoughts, and this is kind of along that line. They're thinking, hey, I just gotta make payroll, I just gotta make rent, I gotta go sell something. I don't have time to, invest massive amounts of energy in this scaling method. I'm just I can't even find a salesperson to help me sell my stuff or whatever this limiting thing is for them. So talk to that person because I think there's a ton of those people out there
Yeah.
that they might be even sitting on a gold mine, but they just are so in the day to day that they just can't even envision that scale. And I'm just curious how you help that person with that blind spot to kind of open up to that thought process.
Got it. Yeah. So they're way too in the business. And so
Yeah.
they're overwhelmed. And so they can't really see the horizon. And so what I would do is the first thing I do when I work with somebody, a founder, is I look at how they spend their time every hour, every 30 minutes of the day, the entire week. How are we spending our time? I would 99% of the time, we can pluck some time to work on the business and not in the business because
Yeah.
we need time to think. A lot of people get into a business and they go on autopilot. They do what's making money, they do what they know. And most of the time, they don't take the time to really think out and think through ideas, concepts, and how to innovate and how to grow from a top-down perspective, which is really what we need to scale. And
Yeah.
so I would extract some time from their week. Let's say it's 5 hours. That's genuinely all you need to work on the business and see that big picture growth. So we're gonna take the 5 hours. We're gonna find it somewhere. No more scrolling, whatever. You're not gonna go out that weekend. This is what we're gonna do. So you're gonna
Yeah.
work on the business. And we need to break down the numbers first off. How much is it taking us to acquire customers? How much are we getting from the customers? How many customers do we have? How are we fulfilling? Just basic data to look at in terms of how the business is operating. A lot of times, one tweak and offer, whether it's adding services or increasing price, allows us to make more money without even having to change our acquisition channels. Like, for example, if my company just worked with brands and we didn't have the done for you side. The done for you side is much more lucrative. Obviously, it's a bigger service, right? And so
Mhm.
if we didn't do that, then I would have to work 10 times harder with established brands to make the same amount of revenue. But I
Fair.
created a brand new packaged offer for a new clientele that allowed me to drive that level of revenue. And so if we could look at our model and say, where can we innovate in a certain way to make more money from either the avatar we work with right now or somebody very similar to it, you can
Yeah.
unlock growth. And that can be an hour. I mean, I had one conversation with a friend of mine. One that was a 30-minute conversation that gave me the idea for the Done For You brand. What that was it. And I was like, you know
Wow.
what? That makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna
Sure.
get to work on it. And I
Yeah.
created the offer and I sent some text and that was it. So it really, if we're able to sit down, 5 hours is plenty. 5 hours is plenty to work on the business, really think through things, top level perspective. You can come up with ideas to make more revenue while not working as hard.
Well, I tell you what, there was a bunch of brake lights that just went on because they were all excited about what you were saying. And then you say time to think. I don't have time to think. I could just hear all these people right now. I don't have time to think. I don't have time to barely, again, do all the things that I have to do. So
Yeah.
I love that piece. It generally is a really difficult thing. I know for myself, when I
Totally.
sit down, like with either a blank sheet of paper or questions about my business, it's like, oh my gosh, it doesn't take more than 9 seconds for like, oh, better check my email. Oh my gosh, what about this? There's all this
Yeah.
stuff that comes in. Is this kind of where Phantom Brands and your coaching comes in? If somebody was listening and they were really appreciating the brand discussion or the scale discussion, but they were not knowing where to turn. Are you kind of the starting spot for people that like that?
For coaching, yeah. So I work
Yeah.
with founders and I consult founders, and we have one-on-one sessions very similar to this. And focus, you mentioned focus and distraction is a massive, massive indicator of growth.
Yeah.
Massive. A lot of entrepreneurs have shiny object syndrome. Their business stagnates for a month, brand new business this month, right? And so they're constantly jumping from focus to focus. And it hurts because you really get the results when you sustain focus and you sustain singular focus on a concept, on a model, on time with a pen and paper to think through things. You can have
Yep.
massive breakthroughs when you maintain that focus. But to answer your question, yes, when I'm coaching and consulting, this is very similar work that we do.
Wow, that's awesome. Hey, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to unpack four things that will potentially hinder your scaling. You have some great insight on these. And so I want to unpack these, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Honored to be hanging out with Jared Jennings, the founder and CEO of Phantom Brands, and we are having a great discussion about scaling. And there was four things that I saw on your website which were really like they were like, wow, I never even would have associated those with the scaling issues. So kind of walk us through that because they're coming from all levels, and I was really excited to unpack these. So there's things that will potentially be in your way that could limit your scaling piece. So your first one was a lack of customer understanding. And I was just like, wow. I mean, just right from the beginning, I love customer because I think obviously customers are such a huge part of our world. But when there's a lack of customer understanding, what did you mean by that? And what does that look like in the average business?
So a lot of people will look at potential clients, potential customers on a very surface level. This is one of the examples, but on a very surface level, right? Let's say, for example, I'm selling coaching. Let's just say I'm selling coaching, and I'm selling coaching to entrepreneurs, right? And so I assume that every entrepreneur that I want to coach with wants to make money, which is true on a surface level. But there's all these types of more deeper levels of understanding their wants, needs, and desires. Typically, it's not about the money. Typically, it's about something much deeper on a psychological level. They want to show their parents that they can do it. They want to, right? Like there's these things beneath the surface that
Sure.
really matter, that really
Okay.
pull the levers when it comes to how we market to them, how we write our copy to them, how we present our service to them, that can make the difference in not only the offer that we create, but also them just coming on board and having a great experience with us. And you can apply this to any industry, any customer. There's much deeper levels to why somebody makes buying decisions than the surface level that most businesses just assume.
And you then come alongside people in your coaching world because I think of that, people for whatever you sell product or service, landscaping, they just, they buy because they want their backyard to look pretty and you kind of
Mhm.
keep it at that surface level. I'm hearing that there's some deeper things going on in that world that may or may not move this forward. So is that where you would come in with founders and owners and entrepreneurs to try to help them understand their customer better?
Yeah, so if I was working with a landscaper, I would want to get first off a little bit more specific on who he's targeting because there's a ton of different people that have gardens or land
Sure.
or whatever
Yep.
needs landscaping.
Yep.
There's a ton of different archetypes, right? Like the person that owns a $20 million house is not the same person that has a trailer home, right? So you have first off, let's get a little bit more specific, right? Based on that information, we can basically come up with ideas and concepts around what they care about. And some of it might be they lean more towards quality, some might lean towards price, right? Like what is the big buying decision maker or convenience or timing or whatever it is, so that we can put that into the offer to make it more appealing and to win market share. That's essentially what I would do.
Okay. And then for the person listening that says, I know, they say my average customer is a male or female. They live in this town. This is their income level. This is their education level. I mean, they know the avatar from that perspective. This sounds like it's a whole different level of understanding your customer. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, it's a psychological level, I would say. It's psychographics, it's
Okay.
understanding also on an ascension level who the customer wants to become. That's also a very important aspect for most businesses is if we're able to position our offering in a way that ascends them to the person that because we all are trying to be somebody more always, right? It's never when we stop progressing, we die. And so we're always trying to be somebody more, whether it's a better father, businessman, whatever. So if we can position what we have to offer on that road of ascension to where they want to go, that's a very powerful way to market to them, as opposed to saying, well, they want a clean lawn,
Yeah.
right? Maybe the lady that has the very rich house wants to impress her friends, and so maybe we can create a service that creates a custom, landscaping design and
Sure.
woo her for double the
Yeah.
money, and it costs
Yeah.
like that's kind of how we would do it.
Do you feel like most of the entrepreneurs that are staying surface level in the demographics that we talked about, do you feel like they know that deeper part, they're just not tapping in? Or is this like a whole new learning curve that people have to end up utilizing in order to grow deeper like that?
It can be a little of both. I mean, I certainly had no idea. I certainly
Okay.
did not know any of this information when I
Yeah.
started, when I was growing my brand, and I was on a quest to become a better marketer because my brand was doing okay, but I wasn't really marketing that well. And I was like, what is the disconnect here? Like, why is this not better? And so I went on a
Yeah.
quest to better my own marketing. And so I read this book that's called How to Build a Story Brand, something of that nature. Really great
Okay.
book. And it taught me about the method of psychological marketing, positioning your product or service in a way that ascends the customer, knowing that everybody's on their own individual quest. And I think we oftentimes forget that people are people, right? Just how we have dreams and aspirations, so does everybody else. And it doesn't matter what you sell, if you can help them get there, they're obviously much more emotionally inclined to buy from you than somebody that
Sure.
doesn't. And so
Yeah.
it was my own pain that opened my mind up to all of these concepts.
Gotcha. So did your customer evolve and change from like the first 9 months of your clothing line? Did your avatar, did your customer change throughout that? Or did you notice there were a lot of consistencies and similarities throughout the journey?
So I sold status. That was the brand.
Okay.
I was streetwear. I was limited drops. I had pro athletes, musicians, etc., wearing the brand. And so what I sold, obviously clothing, but what I really sold was status because if they wore a full hearts piece, then they felt closer to that famous DJ they like or that athlete that they watch. They felt closer to the coolness level, like the status level. And so that's part of their ascension for that specific customer in that regard.
So your avatar did change then throughout that or not really?
My avatar didn't change, but that's how it ascended them in their mind.
Gotcha. Wow, that's so cool. So for people listening, I think it's encouraging me to take a different look at a customer, because again, it's easy to have these tribal knowledge things locked in your brain, their race or their creed, whatever it is that you utilize, their logistics, their income level, whatever you use. So encouraged to go deeper. Are there any tools or things that we can use to kind of look at that from a different perspective? I didn't know if there's anything that you use or where you suggest people go if they want to learn more about their customer.
That book is amazing. The book I just mentioned, I believe it's by Donald Miller. He's a fantastic author when it comes to marketing. So any books that talk about psychographics, psychology of marketing, those are going to be fantastic. In terms of a specific tool, that's the closest thing I got.
Well, no, that's awesome. I mean, I think psychological selling is really the wording that we're talking about. So once we've identified that customer, then we kind of go into the second one that you talked about, which was lack of clarity. So I know what that means to me. I'm super excited to hear what that means to you and see how close I am to what you're thinking.
So most entrepreneurs are congested with information, depending on the level of the entrepreneur, but there's so much information on the internet, right? So let's say somebody is stuck at a certain revenue amount and they want to get better at marketing. They will go on YouTube typically and look at marketing videos. The problem is it's too much information. I mean, in 1 hour, you can watch 10 different videos by 10 different people with 10 different strategies. And so it
Yeah.
actually hurts their ability to make a decision and take action because they don't have clarity. So that's not good. And so what I try to do with all of the people that I coach is be really, really crystal clear on exactly what to do. Just having really clear clarity on, okay, this is our end goal. We're here right now. We're going to take this step this week. This is exactly what you do. This is how you spend your time. This is how you're going to spend 3 hours a day. We're going to build the content or whatever it is. And so they
Yeah.
just have a lot of clarity on how to spend their time. And when you have that clarity, it just mentally, it makes you feel a lot emotionally too. It just makes you feel a lot better knowing you know exactly how to spend your time. You're not guessing.
I'm writing the word as you're saying consistency. I feel like that word kind of comes into play here because if you have an idea where you want to be, it's generally there's a lot of consistent behaviors that get you there. Is there to for clarity? I mean, everybody's clarity is a little bit different. Yours and mine could be different, but the pathway seems to be similar. So I'm just curious if somebody has identified where they want to be, are all the from a scaling perspective, is the path the same or are they all different?
They're pretty different. I would
Okay.
boil it down to who it is that we're talking to and what are we providing them. because every customer hangs out at different places. Every customer receives information very differently. Like my strategy would done for you is it's very niche, so it's all very specific outbound. I would not recommend that strategy if you have a mass market service or product, right? So it really just depends on who are we targeting, what are we providing them, and getting really clear on where they are and how they're spoken to. And you mentioned consistency, which actually hurts a lot of people because we get bored, right? Like
Yeah.
the
Yep.
the things that progress us are really boring and they're the
Right.
same all the time. And so that's why people get really bored and they try to do different things and that ends up hurting them. I've been in that role a million times.
Well, and I got to believe in your payroll days, you were
Oh, that
probably
was
were not
awful.
too, but you were not too excited about filling out call reports, filling out expense reports, filling out projections, filling out all that stuff that would be the consistency. So, do you now do that? Do you expect others to do that? I mean, the thing that you hate now, do you expect other people to do? Or is there a different way that we can get to clarity, or is the consistency a pretty typical way?
Consistency is pretty unavoidable. So we just have to be in love with it. It's okay. Like
Yeah.
we just have to get over it. You know, there's a lot of things that we do on a daily basis that they just have to get done. Sometimes the work just has to get done. That's just how it is.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and consistency, oddly enough, is your third thing there where you're not consistently acquiring new customers. And I run into this a lot on my world where people just kind of they get lax,
Mhm.
and they just don't worry about they stop marketing to new people, they stop thinking about new markets, they stop just, they just kind of put the brakes on, especially in a downturn for whatever reason. I don't know why marketing is like the first thing to get axed off of off the budget. And it's like, man, that should be like the last thing, not the first thing. But
Right.
when you talk about not consistently acquiring new customers, do you see that frequently for people that are struggling scaling?
Yeah, definitely. It's where a lot of volatility is. And so it depends on the model, right? Depends on the business model because service, product, tech, it's all very different.
Yeah.
But if you don't have a clear, consistent system that gets you a certain output of marketing on a daily basis, things can get very inconsistent. And some days you have a ton of meetings or a ton of sales, the next day you don't. That's typically don't want that, right? We want consistent, we want systems, we want things to just operate. We want the outbound to be working well or the ads, whatever it is, however we're acquiring customers, we want to just be consistent, tracked, and scaled, grown.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and I think of like um, monster like Coke or Pepsi, and I think people start thinking about that. Those are the companies that need to scale. Those are the companies. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be able to consistently, acquire new customers. But it's like, where in the world would a Coke or a Pepsi get new customers other than from like stealing from each other, number one? Or I love the fact that they're now at least trying new flavors and different things like that. So, I mean, not the Coke part, but just companies in general. Where's like where's some low-hanging fruit in your mind for us to go for somebody that hasn't thought about new customers in a while? Are there any easy spots that are universal to go?
Universal easy spots. Probably not.
Not making it harder on anything for you, Jared. Just give me the silver bullet. That's we'd like that, and we'd like it in nine
Yeah.
seconds. So,
Here's a check. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. See how easy that was perfect.
I would say, I mean, Meta covers a vast majority of people by now. Meta covers a lot. Google also is fantastic for anything search related.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say it just comes down to like what are you offering and what the customers like. If we talk about Coke and Pepsi, I'm drinking this alternative soda called a Poppy, and Pepsi just acquired them, which is interesting.
Okay.
They just
Yeah.
got a ton of customers, right? So Pepsi acquired Poppy for 1.9 billion. They're a healthy soda alternative. And so now you can see Pepsi is going into the market of people that are more health conscious, people
Sure.
that want a new alternative soda. And that's, acquisition is an interesting way to get clients.
Yeah. Wow. And that's where, again, I think that's where I love the value that you bring to a team and to a customer because we have these limiters, we have these, we have these
Right.
blinders on, and we have blind spots, and we don't know that. I mean, for years, I'm guessing Coke and Pepsi were fighting each other and forgetting about maybe juices or forgetting about the healthy things,
Totally.
whatever, water, whatever. They were just so focused on getting their soda machine in Kentucky Fried Chicken or McDonald's or whatever. So I think that that's great. I'm hoping that people listening are starting to get an idea in their mind of where that they can scale. And the last one that you talked about, which was really kind of, I have to say, I would have not put this in this spot, but you talked about breakdowns in hiring. And so kind of fill us in on that because our team is necessary. Sometimes we have the old school where, the beatings are going to continue until morale improves type thing. Where do teams fit in scaling for you and in your company?
So with Phantom specifically, there's a ton of different roles that we have for building a brand or growing a brand. For building a brand, there's the design process. So we have designers and there's the production people, our partners that do the production. There's the content side, there's the website side. And so when I started Phantom, I very quickly came to realize the importance of people. I was like, business. I'm like, business is literally people, like literally people that you just put in place as a team.
Yeah.
And it's what makes the world go round. It's what makes a business go round. And so I learned how to hire from the ground up. I had some mentors, but I've made a ton of mistakes. I tried hiring a bunch of affiliates on at one time, like 10 of them on. I had like 20 interviews a day I was doing. It was crazy. It was crazy. I've done all this sort of stuff. And so I know the value of people, like it really matters.
Sure.
And turnover also is painful and miserable. And you have to retrain someone. And like, there's all these things that go into it, but we can't scale past our own capacity ever ever, right? Elon Musk by himself would still be capped. He needs people. He has amazing people. Steve Jobs example, right? He has amazing people that came to him, told him these concepts. And so we're only one person. If we really want to scale and grow, we absolutely need people. So I do find it very important to talk with the founders I work with on how they're hiring, how they're training, what they're looking for, how they're bringing people on. I find it very important.
Wow. Well, and I feel it shouldn't be an afterthought, I guess, right?
Right.
I mean, I think that's what ends up happening. It's the opposite of the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. If do we build it first and then attract, talent, and then from there attract customers, or do you go the other way and attract customers and then find a team? Again, probably a little variation of both of those, but I think it's a lot of entrepreneurs seem to miss that thought that you just said, that business equals people, because it's like I run into people now that are doing this. They're on this fire fast thought process, and I'm not here to say it's right or wrong. It just seems odd to me because I'm the type of person where I try to, flip the thing every certain way, rather than it's easy to fire somebody. Hey, your services are no longer needed, depending on what state you're in. We're in a fire at will state, so, or whatever you call it. So I can just say, hey, your services are no longer needed. Have a nice day. It just feels so anti-scaling. But one of the questions that I had as we start to land the plane today is, I'm assuming that a bad team, because my book, Growing on Purpose, we dug into deep that good teams produce good experiences for customers. And it's pretty well proven that bad teams create a bad experience for customers. I just wanted to know if you've had that same experience and where you stand on that thought process.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that is king, if not one of the kings of scaling and growing a business is you need happy customers because
Yeah,
the most profitable way to acquire new ones is from happy ones because it
yeah,
costs you nothing. And so if we don't have that, we need to fix our product first.
yeah.
We need a better product because we're never to be able to grow if we just acquire somebody and it's complete churn because they never refer us, they never use us again. We have no LTV. So that would be a massive problem. And a big
Yeah.
indicator of that is your team. So I completely agree.
Especially as expensive as it is in today's world to acquire a new customer. I don't know which, I mean, financially, it's probably still more expensive to acquire a new teammate than it is a customer, but they're starting to get closer and closer to each other. And depending on, the research that you look at, the cost of a bad hire is, anywhere from $100,000 on up. And, I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't think that way. They just
Mhm.
think, oh, we just got to get this guy or girl out of here. So I love that you in your world there's this chunk about the team, so I'm glad that we were able to touch on that. So as we land today, what would your tip of the day be for somebody listening, Jared? Maybe it's something we covered, maybe it's something that we haven't, but what would your tip of the day be for somebody listening?
I would reiterate the think point because it's something nobody wants to do. But let me tell you, when you put down the phone, when you go on Do Not Disturb, when you actually spend the time to read, internalize, and think of ideas, I mean, you could think of an idea that could change your life. You own a business or you don't own a business, you're one shift away from changing your life very rapidly. There's a story I read about this entrepreneur, and for 5 years, he made no money. He was in $500,000 worth of debt doing this skincare company. And he had this idea to change his model to licensing. And essentially overnight, he started making millions of dollars a month from
Mhm.
zero, actually zero, negative 500,000, 5 years of suffering
Yeah.
to millions of dollars a month because he changed his business model, changed his idea, changed his concept. That's the power of thinking. You don't
Wow.
have the ability to think if you're constantly in the weeds.
Wow,
That's my
that's
that's
great.
my that's my tidbit.
Well, you had everybody until those nasty four words, put down the phone. Because it's like I love speaking at groups around the country, and I'm like, all right, everybody, shut your phone off. And they're just like looking around like I just, insulted their best friend. And it's just like, man, there's nothing everybody's got, oh, someone needs to get a hold of me. And it's just like, man, don't be so tied to that, especially like you said, is take that time to think. So that's awesome. Hey Jared, if somebody's listening and this really inspired them today and they want to connect with you, they want to learn more about Phantom Brands and the coaching that you offer, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
I am Jared Jennings on all platforms, and my company is phantom-brands.com.
Awesome. So Jared Jennings, Jennings, and it's jaredjennings.com. So you made
For
it super
coaching.
easy, which
Yes.
is awesome.
Yes.
And there's a bunch of good information there. And again, for the listener, I just want to encourage you to find one or two things that Jared shared today. And rather than jump into your next podcast, your next activity, is really sit with that and think. I know it's hard. Trust me, I know it's hard. I know it's hard to put the phone down and I had that little envelope on the bottom of my screen every time there's an email that shows up. So I'm like, oh, I got to shut that off because otherwise I'll never get it done. But even if it's 5 minutes, just take the next 5 minutes after this podcast today and just think about, what does scaling mean? What are one or two things that Jared shared with you today that you want to, explore more? And again, jump on to jaredjennings.com for connection with him. Thank you so much. Man, this has been awesome. There's such good stuff. I have such better clarity about scaling. I was intimidated to have this discussion with you today because I'm thinking it's massive but you did a great job of sharing that with us. So I appreciate that. And I will continue to learn from you. And I need to spend some time thinking. So when I'm doing it, I'm going to think of you and I'm going to be like, thanks, Jared, man. Thanks for making me turn my phone off too. So don't call me anymore today because I'm just going to think here for the rest of the day. So, but thank
Thanks
you
for
so
having me,
much for
Dave.
hanging out with us.
Thank you so much.